living fully alive in every way. You're listening to Relationship Prescriptions with Dr. Carol.
How do you keep going when everything seems lost? Hi there, I'm Dr. Carol, and you're listening to Relationship Prescriptions. That certainly was the case for Kayla Stocklien, and yet she has found a way to keep going. Now, before we get into more details, I just want to give you a quick alert. This will be a sensitive and challenging episode. If you have young ears that this may not be appropriate for, I just encourage you to pause for a moment, occupy them elsewhere, and then come back. Mental illness affects, many say, 1 in 4 every year. Sometimes that's chronic, sometimes it's unexpected, sometimes it's life-threatening. Although we know so much more about mental illness now than we did years ago, there is still a lot of confusion, a lot we don't know. There's a lot of stigma and shame. Families are disrupted. That was the case for Kayla Stocklien. On August 25, 2018, she lost her husband, Andrew, megachurch pastor of Inland Hills Church in Chino, California, to suicide. Andrew's journey with mental illness prior to his death had been complicated, unexpected, long, intense. It had affected his church and his family in some very deep ways. Kayla also has had to experience the death of her husband and walk forward with her children in this journey. Now, 2 years later, she is sharing her story and has a book where she is doing that, talking about the tragedy she experienced, what she learned about mental illness through that journey, and now her experience of walking through grief and choosing to move forward. If you have experienced mental illness, or if you know someone who has, or if your family has been impacted by suicide, this will be both a heart-touching but also encouraging conversation. We get very real in this conversation. Kayla shared her heart. There's really not much left on the table here. Everything's just kind of laid out there. And it will perhaps trouble you to hear this story, but it will also point you toward hope. And that's what I pray you experience through this conversation with Kayla Stocklien. It's looking at some of the darkest realities that we live in our world, but seeing how God is there in the middle of it and how he can bring you through it. So, without waiting any longer, here's my conversation with Kayla Stocklien. Well, Kayla Stocklien, it is a pleasure and an honor to have you on our program today. Thank you so much for sharing yourself, your time. It's great to have you here.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm so honored to be here today. Thank you.
It was almost 2 years ago when I first heard about you, and it was in a setting that it was just so complicated and full of pain and tragedy, and yet hope. I'd just like to start with giving you a moment to share the big pieces of the story for those who may not be aware of who you are and how you come to be here now.
Sure, yeah. I was born and raised in California, Southern California. I met the love of my life, Andrew, at a little Christian college in Costa Mesa, California. In 2008 is when we met, and we fell in love really fast, got married in 2010, and hit the ground running doing ministry. And his parents started a church when he was 3 years old, so he had grown up in ministry and was passionate about the church, and that's what he was called to do. And so he was working at the church, and during our first year of marriage, his father was diagnosed with leukemia. And so it was a 4-year journey with leukemia. And over those 4 years, my husband continued to step up to the plate and was handed more responsibility. And about 3 months before his father passed away, he was handed the official baton of leadership and became the lead pastor of our church at 27 years old, at a church of over 4,000 people, staff of over 30 people. So a very big responsibility at a very young age. And we were also growing a family at the time. So we were adding kids to our family. We had 3 little boys. By 2016, we had 3 little boys, and we were in the trenches of full-time ministry. I loved being a pastor's wife. I was passionate about being a pastor's wife. I loved watching him in his sweet spot on stage on Sunday. I loved the way that God was using him in our family, and I loved serving him in our church. In fall of 2017, Andrew started suffering from panic attacks. And those panic attacks were very debilitating. They were very out of the blue, out of nowhere, and they were happening about 2 to 3 times a week. And they would happen when he would try to fall asleep at night, and he would just be overcome with pain. It would start in his chest, and he have this really intense pain, almost like a heart attack in his chest, and then it would spread throughout his body. And I'll never forget the look in his eyes when he was experiencing a panic attack. His eyes would be glazed over and he would be gone. And those panic attacks led to a massive panic attack that landed him in the hospital in April of 2018. And we all just decided enough is enough. This guy needs to take a break, and we need to figure out what's going on. And so a few weeks later, we were sitting in a psychiatrist's office, and he was diagnosed with depression. And I'll never forget that day. The psychiatrist turned and looked at me. You know, I'd stepped out of the room while he did his evaluation, and I came back in, and he turned and looked at me and said, "Your husband has depression." And I was so shocked, and I was so stunned. Like, even after all the panic attacks and anxiety and everything, I still didn't see it coming. I was so shocked. I didn't say anything. We walked back to the car. I slid into the car. I looked at him and I said, "How did we end up here? Like, how did this happen to you?" This invincible man who had rose to the occasion every time, who had led our church through 4 very difficult years of his dad's leukemia journey and through the loss of his dad, and was doing a great job. Like, how did he wind up with depression? I was shocked. And so that summer, we were doing everything we knew to do to get him better. He was seeing a psychiatrist every other week. He was taking medication. We were seeing a therapist for 2 hours together every single week. We took a trip together, just the 2 of us, for a few weeks. He did some solo trips by himself. Like, we were doing everything we knew to do. And by July 2018, the doctors actually thought he was better, thought he was getting better, and released him to go back to work. So he returned to work, and he hit the ground running, gave 2 powerful messages on mental illness. He was talking about something that a lot of pastors at the time weren't talking about. And he was using his own experience as the example. He was talking about depression and anxiety and suicidal ideation. He gave out the suicide hotline number. Like, he was talking about it and addressing it, and it was powerful. The church was packed. People gave him a standing ovation. It was a really beautiful few weeks at church. And then headed into the 3rd weekend, he just had a really awful day at the office. And unfortunately, the following morning, while we were away from him for a very small period of time, working on what's next, we knew that he still wasn't well. It was a big sign to us, like, okay, we thought he was well, but he still isn't well. And so we were going to be taking the next steps to get him the help he needed. And while we were away from him, he attempted suicide. And he was rushed to the hospital, and unfortunately, the doctors were not able to do anything. And the following day, he went to be with Jesus, August 25th, 2018.
Wow. And here you are, a pastor's wife, a mom of 3 little boys, just overwhelmed with everything that's going on. There's just so many questions to go into about your experience, Kayla. I'd just like to maybe talk a bit about the mental health aspects of this, because it's such a big deal, and there's lots of statistics out there. But can you just highlight a little bit about how big a problem mental health issues are in our country, and even especially for pastors.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 1 in 5, the statistics are 1 in 5 people in the US suffer from mental illness. Suicide worldwide, 800,000 people a year. I mean, it is a growing problem. And I think right now in this season of the world, where we're in this pandemic and we're all isolated in our homes, we're all grieving the loss of the way that things used to be. Like all of us are grieving that loss. And as a mom, we're forced to, as a single mom, I'm forced to be the breadwinner and figure out how to work, and also be the teacher and teach my kids school, and also be the homemaker and take care of the home. Like there's so much responsibility on the plates of everybody throughout the whole world. And so it's a very unique time. And I think that there's going to be mental health ramifications to come from this season that we're in right now. And so my heart is that we would just find better ways to talk about mental illness, to help break the stigma surrounding mental illness, to normalize it and make the conversation normal and comfortable, and help people be able to feel comfortable talking about their dark thoughts and depression and anxiety and suicidal thoughts. And I think if we are able to break down some of those walls and those barriers and create more space for people to step in and tear down their walls and be comfortable sharing their true feelings, that we can really save lives and change that statistic.
You write in your book, Fear Gone Wild, and we'll let people know where to get that here shortly, but you write about how Andrew was so convinced that God was the place to run to, and he was doing that. You and others were all praying. It wasn't like you were trying to keep life separate, keep God separate from this mental health journey. And I just like to come back to that for a second and hopefully undo some of the untruths that some in the Christian world have said, that if you truly believed God, if your faith was truly strong, if you were truly living right, that you wouldn't have depression, you wouldn't go into that area of mental illness, you wouldn't experience that. I know you believe that's not true. I believe that's not true, but talk about that a little bit. Even as a pastor, as one who kept running toward God, this was still a problem.
Yeah, and that was so frustrating. I was under that assumption too. I would say that I was naive, and I was under that assumption too during the time that he was sick. I have a bachelor's degree in psychology. I have the basic understanding of the human mind, and I still was under the assumption that if you have enough faith, and if you pray enough, and if you read your Bible, and if you're connected to God, then you will not struggle with anxiety and depression and suicidal thoughts. That was deeply ingrained into me. And I think that I just picked that up from growing up in the church and going to a Christian college. And I just thought that's the way that it worked. And it's not. I could say from my experience with Andrew, he was running to God. Yeah. There were days where he was resting a lot. He was in our bedroom resting a lot. The depression exhausted him. And so he spent a lot of time resting. And most of the time when I'd walk into the bedroom to check on him, he would have his big silver headphones on, and he would be blasting worship music, and he would be weeping. I mean, he was running to God, and he was begging God to heal him. He was begging God to take it away. He hated that this was stopping him from doing his job. I mean, he was a man that was driven for excellence, driven for success, super motivated, and this just pulled him out of the game. And so he hated it. And so he was running to God. And, I was begging God too, and it felt like God was just silent. And I think that was really, really confusing for me during that period of time. I'm crying out to God, and he's crying out to God, and Andrew's not getting better. Yeah. And so I think sometimes God says no. So what do we do in the wilderness of mental illness when God isn't intervening and isn't healing? You hear stories of miraculous healing. I had anxiety, I had depression, I went to church and they prayed over me and I never struggled a day in my life again. Yes. That's amazing. And I truly believe God can do that. I believe that God has the power to do anything, but I also believe that sometimes God says no, or the healing comes later. And for Andrew's case, the healing came in heaven. The healing didn't come on this side of heaven. And after Andrew died, it felt like God was everywhere. So it was so confusing for me because we're in this season. I'm like, where are you, God? Where are you, God? Where are you, God? Why aren't you fixing this? Why isn't he getting better? And then Andrew passes away, and literally it felt like God was everywhere.
In the whole journey of grief and the why questions before Andrew's death and after Andrew's death, for you, how did you address those why questions? What did you do with them?
I was mad. I was mad. I was mad at my circumstances. I was mad at God. Here I am. I felt like a single mom in a lot of ways during that time because I had my 3 kids. They were 2, 4, and 5 at the time. Then I have a husband who's very sick. And so he spent most of the time in the bedroom, and I'm trying to take care of our 3 kids, So I'm trying to balance being caretaker to my husband who's struggling, and then present mother to 3 very active, very busy, very rambunctious boys who were all home on summer break. So they were there all of the time. And so I was really mad. I would walk around my house and I would cry out in desperation, like, why aren't you fixing this, God? Like, God, I hate my life. God, I hate my circumstances. Like, why are you not like taking this away from us? Like, what did we do to deserve this? Like here he is, a pastor, and he's serving you with his life, and you're allowing this to happen to him. And you already allowed his dad to pass away. Like, you're going to allow his dad to pass away. And then now you're going to allow this season of mental illness. And then ultimately God also allowed Andrew to die. And so there's a lot of, in that season, a lot of anger and frustration and just like, I don't understand. But through all of that anger and that not understanding, I still had my hands open, and I was still running to God and giving it to God and trusting God. And I still had hope. Even then, even through all of that, I still had hope that he could fix it. I had written in my journal the day before Andrew passed away. I think it was the day before he passed away. And and I share the journal entry in the book. And it's like, I had all this hope. I had hope that God was going to heal him. I had hope that this was just a season. I had hope that like we would make it through this and we would get on the other side. And now here I am, 2 years later, and I'm on the other side of mental illness. Andrew is no longer here and he's healed in heaven, but I've got a lot of other problems in this new season of life as a single parent, a lot more responsibility and things now where life is still hard.
Yes.
Yeah.
You are open that you and Andrew, you went for counseling, you saw a psychiatrist and addressed medication options. He was taking medication. He was exercising. He was working out, taking nutritional supplements, and you all were praying. All of the above. And from my scientific perspective, I think that's often what God calls us to do is all of the above. There's another aspect that you write about in Fear Gone Wild that can frighten some people, but both in my own personal experience and in what I see, I think is important to be honest about. And that's the whole arena of spiritual warfare. And you talk about experiences where Andrew had just feeling these dark presence around him. And without getting into, all the darkness, just if you would talk a bit about that aspect of what we are living in this world still, it is part of what we face.
Yes. And I felt like that was really important to share in the book because it was such a real part of his confusion and his journey with mental illness. And, for him, it was real and it was really terrifying. I mean, in his experience, he would see things and he would describe just this dark presence that he would see and the things that he heard and the way that he just felt oppressed. He felt oppressed by the darkness to the point where there would be moments where he would be feeling this way, and he would, I'd be on the porch or outside with the kids, and he would send me a text. I'd come running in, and he'd be hiding under the covers, shaking and crying, terrified. And so it was a very real reality for him. And I think a lot of pastors, because they are doing the work of God, and because God is using them, and because they're in the spotlight, like, the enemy doesn't like that. And the enemy is going to come after them. And Andrew talked about that often. And, I think that for him was a private struggle throughout our whole marriage, throughout his whole time as a pastor, that he didn't talk about often. I think it was magnified when mental illness started, because he had had an experience during our first year anniversary that I share about in the book as well. But I think it was magnified during his mental health journey. And it was very real and really terrifying to him. And he was also running to God in that. Like, he felt that real presence of the enemy, and like he was under attack, and he was very aware of that. I think I think for him, I think some of us just have more of a sensitivity to that, and are more aware of that. Each of us have our own unique spiritual gifts and giftings, and the way that God has hardwired us. And I didn't see what he was seeing. And so for me, it was very confusing. Like, I'd walk in the room, like, what are you talking about? Like, it's just our bedroom. Like, there's nothing here. Like, what's going on? Like, it was so confusing for me, but I had to put myself into his situation and try to crawl into that dark space with him, and sit with him, and pray with him, and be with him, and offer him that love and encouragement and hope that he needed in those dark moments.
Yeah. Oh, I just want to personally say thank you for being honest about that here, and also in the book. In thinking back, one of the things I'm wondering about is, are there things that you look back and wish, after I lost my husband, I look back and think, if I had, done this different? And I'm not sure anybody loses a loved one without any regrets, but for you, are there any that you around mental illness might want to just comment on, things looking back now that you wish you had done different maybe, or known?
Yeah, definitely. I wish we would have treated his mental illness as more of a team. I think mental illness needs to be treated as a team. And I think we tried, but I think we didn't do a great job of that. I wish I would have had somebody go with Andrew to every single psychiatrist appointment and every single doctor's appointment. I wish I would have scheduled childcare so I could have been there for him, to advocate for him. I wish I would have been able to be completely honest with the doctors and tell them how he was really doing at home. I think in wanting to protect him and wanting to protect his image and not embarrass him, I didn't share the specifics of what was happening at home to the extent that they were happening at home, and Andrew wasn't sharing them either. So the doctors weren't able to effectively help him because they weren't all in the loop of what was going on at home. And so I wish I would have gone to every single doctor's appointment, and I wish I would have been extremely honest. And I also wish I would have invited a few more friends and family members into what we were experiencing on the day-to-day. And then I also, one of my biggest regrets, probably my biggest regret, is Andrew talked about suicide one time. There was one time where we were sitting at the kitchen counter. It was late at night. We put the kids to bed, and I was frustrated about something. And his response to me, he was explaining to me that he was up in the middle of the night before, and he had his staff organization charts spread all over the kitchen counter, trying to figure out how to organize the staff so when he returned to work, it would just be a better running machine. And he said he was up in the middle of the night, had his papers strewn all over the counter, and he thought about killing himself. And my response to him was, Andrew, that is the most selfish thing you could ever do. I was so close to it. I was so exhausted. I was so run down. I didn't understand. And I genuinely, deeply believed that he would never do it. Like I had just put suicide off the table. Like that would never happen to him. That would never happen to us. He would never do that to our boys. He would never do that to our family. Like I justified in my head that I don't even need to have a second thought about that. And so he shared that. That was my response. And his response to me, I'll never forget it, was, Kayla, you need to come up with something better to say. That's not what you say to someone that tells you that they are struggling with suicidal thoughts. And he is completely right. Like, that was not the right thing to say. And so now I know better, hindsight's 2020, and now I know better. And I wish that I would have not reacted. I wish I would have responded, and I wish I would have listened. I wish I would have asked more questions like, do you have a suicide plan? Do you know when or how you would do it? What problem are you trying to solve through suicide? I wish I would have told the psychiatrist. I wish I would have told the therapist. I didn't tell anybody. I didn't even tell his family, because I literally brushed it off the table and put it to the side and thought that would never happen and that he's just being dramatic. But the reality is it did happen, and he wasn't just being dramatic.
Yeah. Wow. That's heart-tugging, heart-wrenching. You've mentioned a couple things already in thinking about your journey with Andrew, but for the Christian church, perhaps more broadly, we've had a checkered history, I believe, in the Christian church about dealing with mental illness. Certainly not always the safest and most welcoming place. And yet we know God has a lot to say about healing people or walking people through a wilderness season, regardless of the details. What would you say for followers of Jesus in the church? How can we do better in ministering to people, or how should we think about this whole area of mental illness and being with people who are struggling there?
Yeah, I would say we can all do a better job of leaning into the conversation, of growing and developing our empathy. And I think we can do that by listening, by sitting. Like, I think when I think of Jesus and how he would approach someone that's suffering from mental illness, and what we see throughout scripture is, like, he doesn't just offer advice. He doesn't just tell them what to do. It's like he pulls up a chair and he sits next to them and he crawls into that space with them. And he's like, hey, how can I serve you? What can I do for you? And I think for us as followers of Jesus, like, the best thing that we can do for someone that's suffering is to crawl into that space and to sit in the suffering with them and ask them how we can share in the suffering with them. How can we serve them? What can we do? And we can keep showing up. Oftentimes someone that's suffering from mental illness likes to pull away, or because of their mental illness, they'll pull away in isolation. And that can be very difficult to try to keep engaging someone that's tucked away in isolation. But I think we can do a better job of that as well, of not just brushing them to the side or brushing them off or thinking that they're dramatic or thinking that they're intense. Like, keep showing up. If they don't answer the phone, like, leave an encouraging voicemail or send them a text or drop by their porch. If they don't answer the door when you drop by and knock on their door, like, leave a note on the door, like, send dinner over. Like, there's so many things that we can do to reach people that are tucked away in darkness. And I think that we can just do a better job of seeking to understand instead of jumping to conclusions. There's a little phrase that my mother-in-law shared after my husband passed away. Her and I gave his last message together. We shared it. He had already written it. So we got on stage and gave his last message. It was super special, very sacred Sunday for us. And there are these 3 little words that she shared in that message. And the 3 words were, I have no idea. Or there are 4 words, I have no idea. And just how powerful that phrase is. Like, we truly have no idea what it's like to walk in anybody's shoes but our own. I have no idea what it was like for Andrew to experience what he was experiencing in his struggle with depression and anxiety and suicidal ideation and spiritual warfare. Like, I have no idea. But that doesn't mean that I don't get to care and that I don't get to help. Like, I still need to sit with him and try to understand the best that I can.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you for sharing that. I think when we see somebody struggling, any of us can be tempted to pull away if we can't fix it. And many people struggling with mental health and related issues, we can't immediately go and fix it. Our prayers can't fix it immediately. Well, I mean, we know God in the big picture can, but I love how you're encouraging us to stay there and stay engaged, even when it may not look like we're doing anything, but that is what they need. They need us with them.
Yeah.
As you now are journeying in this next season, you're raising your boys and all the challenges that a single mom and a widow and all those things bring. I'm wondering, is there something that gives you hope? Is there anything you are looking forward to, or where do you keep your mind going? I noticed near the end of the book, you talk about needing to choose life. You had to choose life after laying Andrew to rest. That was a powerful moment as I read about your story. And of course, that's been a couple of years ago now. What's that been like more currently with that choice of having to continue to choose life?
It's been extremely painful. I mean, the most intense, agonizing, like deep, guttural pain that I've ever experienced in my whole life. It's a different kind of pain. And when Andrew passed away, I had this beautiful, wonderful life. I was living the life of my dreams. I was in my dream home with my dream guy, had these 3 beautiful kids, this beautiful calling, this beautiful purpose with leading this wonderful church. Like, I, on paper and in my heart, had everything I could have asked for and more. And when Andrew passed away, it's like all of those hopes and all of those dreams died with him. And I was handed this brand new, unwanted, did not ask for it life. And for the last 2 years, it's been that choosing life and choosing joy. I have a little sign in my garage right above where I work out, and it says defiant joy. It's choosing joy. It's chasing after joy when you do not feel like it. When you feel overcome with pain, when you feel overcome with grief, when you feel overcome with anxiety about the future, like it's that choosing joy and believing that joy is possible. And I think that's what I've discovered these last few years, is that joy and sorrow can coexist.
Yes.
And so it's a daily walk with joy and sorrow. And my son described this so beautifully. He had this Mother's Day makeover at his school, and I went to it. He's in kindergarten at the time. It was the first year after Andrew's death. So it was the first Mother's Day after his death, and he had these little fill in the blanks for Mother's Day. And one of the fill in the blanks said, "I love it when my mom takes me to the cemetery." And then in the other blanket said, "takes me to Disneyland." Literally the saddest place on earth and the happiest place on earth in the same sentence. And that's his perspective, and that's his reality. It's like one foot at the cemetery and one foot at Disneyland, and that's how we're moving forward.
That is an awesome picture, Kayla. I know after my husband passed away, I don't know that I could have ever imagined or described it before about how pain and hope, I felt like I could feel pain and hope at the same time. And you talking about joy and sorrow being there at the same time. The joy does not wipe out the pain, the sorrow. That is still overwhelming. And yet the joy is available to choose. And I thank you for highlighting that. I hope that people hear that just because you've chosen joy and the pain doesn't go away, it doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. It's the reality of living in the world where we are, and that's okay, that's what this journey is about.
That's right.
Well, I want to say bless you for sharing so much of your heart in such a real way that I know encourages others. And just about your book and your website and whatever, where would be the best place if people want to find out more?
Yeah, the best place to find me is on Instagram. My Instagram handle is Kayla Steck. I have a website, kaylastocklien.com. My new book, Fear Gone Wild, A Story of Mental Illness, Suicide, and Hope Through Loss, releases September 8th, wherever books are sold.
And we'll make sure links are available to our listeners and viewers as well. Well, God bless you greatly and walk with you daily. It's been great to have you, Kayla.
Thank you so much. Such an honor. Thank you.
Wow. I know as I talked with Kayla, my heart was torn. It was pulled. Now, I've experienced the death of my husband, but not to suicide. And there's so many extra dimensions there, so many extra questions. I know I am encouraged to hear how Kayla has made the choice to move forward and how vulnerable she is choosing to be in sharing her story. Check the show notes. We'll make sure that the link to her book, Fear Gone Wild, A Story of Mental Illness, Suicide, and Hope Through Loss. The links to that will be in the show notes, as well as to her website and social media. Read her story. Get it for a friend if you know their family is struggling. And know that God will walk through your journey with you, regardless of how dark it looks. If you or someone you love is struggling with mental illness, don't believe it's hopeless. Andrew's journey ended in death. That doesn't mean yours has to. And also, I want you to hear again some of the hopeful messages that Kayla is sharing. There is help available. And don't give up. If you have questions about this or any episode, feel free to come to our website, drcarolministries.com. Leave a comment or a question. This is one of those areas where I believe God deals with his children very tenderly. It's where the enemy means much harm, but Jesus reaches out in encouragement and hope and love to walk with you through, whether it's you or whether it's someone you love who is experiencing this kind of illness. I pray right now that Kayla's story and our conversation today has been an encouragement to you, even while we have looked at some of the dark realities that this area brings up in our world. I pray Jesus bless you with his courage, wisdom, and peace. It would be great if you would share about these podcast episodes with others. That helps more people find it. The more times you share these episodes, we raise up in the rankings, and that helps other people who may not have known about relationship prescriptions find it. So we'd encourage you to do that. And again, I would love to hear from you. The contact page on drcarolministries.com. I respond to those personally, whether it's a question, a comment, or even perhaps a topic you'd like on an upcoming episode. And until next time, may God bless you.
Thank you for listening to Relationship Prescriptions with Dr. Carol. Our purpose is to provide trustworthy resources that help you and others live fully alive in every way as God intended. If you would like to help others experience transformation in their lives and relationships, we invite you to partner with us. Text the word GIVE, that's GIVE, to the number 512-980-1620. Or visit our website at drcarolministries.com/donate to make a one-time contribution or monthly gift. Your financial support allows us to expand our message and to help others. Thank you so much, and may God bless you.